Mr. M-O-M-E-N-T. She prays she never miss a M-O-M-E-N.
Voss, and I think I've finally seen the light on the biggest mystery of Avengers Doomsday. Not
Talk
only
to
the
me.
largest question I had after seeing the Doomsday trailer at CinemaCon, how does Steve Rogers catch up with Thor and the other Marvel heroes in the present conflict, but really the answer that connects that
That shit didn't intrigue me that much.
Fantastic Four, and why it has to be Robert Downey Jr. as Dr. Doom in this film. It only took 3 weeks after seeing the trailer, but I think I got there. And speaking of Doomsday, I think one of the most important Marvel movies to revisit ahead of Avengers Doomsday is actually 2014's X-Men Days of Future Past, a movie that we revisit in this week's episode of the Road to Doomsday Rewatch podcast. Now,
It was like a
Doomsday,
YouTube movie?
all episodes starting
Oh,
this
there you
month
go.
through the end of this year will truly be essential Doomsday-focused rewatches covering
You know,
details
I'm
that
so
we are
happy
confident
No Way
will
Home's on
return in
Disney
that
Plus
film
finally,
and
bro.
or
It
Secret
only took
Wars.
forever.
Here is our May schedule. Check out this show. I think you'll really like this weekend's episode. So as I've covered in a few videos now, the Avengers Doomsday trailer that I saw at CinemaCon that hopefully will be released sometime soon ends with Thor's speech wrapping up with, "We're going to need a miracle," as he carries both Stormbreaker and Mjolnir on an unknown ship, and then we hear the voice of Steve Rogers say, "Hey pal," and Thor says, "That's not possible," and then Mjolnir zips to Steve's hand. Steve looks down at the hammer and then smiles back at Thor, and I can confirm that Johnny Storm is standing behind Steve on this vessel. Steve's appearance is different than how he appears in the first teaser from December. It actually matches the leaked costume photos from January that you might have seen. That I can't show you those in this video, but that silly Yellow Minutes channel AI video that was based on my and others' descriptions of what we saw, yeah, this is pretty much how Steve looks. His hair is now longer, he has a beard, and the clothes he's wearing are relatively modern with a dark bomber jacket and a dark t-shirt underneath. So what is the miracle that Thor refers to here, and why does he consider Steve Rogers' return to be not possible? I mean, it's kind of weird for Thor to be saying that, considering after Endgame, and since Thor is on the Fantastic Four ship,
But he's never
considering
seen
he
him turn
himself
into
is a god from another cosmic realm, it
Old
shouldn't be
Man
that
Rogers.
shocking to the god of thunder to face the implications of quantum time travel and multiversal crossovers. So I actually think Thor is saying that's not possible to some other context than just seeing Steve Rogers again, but I'll get to that at the end of this video. Let's talk about the how here. How has Steve Rogers returned? I've kind of punted on that question in all other Doomsday related videos in the past few weeks, but there are a few straightforward logical answers to how Steve Rogers could have gone from being in the late 40s, early 50s of another universe to the present of whatever universe Thor is in now in this moment. For example, to even go on that journey at the end of Endgame to return each of the Infinity Stones to their rightful points in history and in the cosmos, Steve Rogers would have to be equipped with a large supply of Pym particle vials to fuel each of those quantum jumps. We know he grabbed 4 additional ones in the past in Pym's lab in Camp Lehigh in 1970, but we're also talking about after the final battle of Endgame, when Bruce Banner built a whole new quantum tunnel device, and Scott Lang and Hank Pym would have been on standby to help the Avengers produce as many Pym vials as they needed for that vital return journey. Now, presumably, the one extra that Steve would have had to come back to the present after returning the stones, he used instead to jump back to 1949 to be with Peggy Carter. But I also have to imagine how close to the catastrophe the Avengers were in the time heist based on nearly running out of Pym vials. They would have totally sent Steve on this last journey with a few contingency redundant vials. So I think Steve could have used a vial and its quantum wrist tech to return to whenever and wherever the events of Doomsday are happening now. But there's another more holistic explanation that really explains everything, I think. Much of the rumors and speculation in recent months that I've tried to avoid because they were coming from scoopers claiming they know plot leaks, they've all kind of pointed in a direction that I'm now not that afraid to share because it adheres to theories that I now have evidence for and clues that I've now been able to connect to the Doomsday footage that I saw. So let's talk about the speculation that Steve Rogers is in the Fantastic Four universe. That at the beginning of Doomsday, he's actually in Earth 828. Now, for many of you, this probably is not the first time you've heard this theory. I know I'm not the first to say it or think it, but
Oh, okay. That low-key makes sense. Because if Johnny's behind him and he's on the ship, they must have picked up Thor, and that nigga Steve Rogers is already on there. But how he end up in that universe though? That's the question.
I did wonder about it in at least one past video that involved the TVA relocating Steve and Peggy's entire house from whatever branch universe it was in, then to the 828 universe of the Fantastic Four. But now I'm just building on the speculation that's already out there that when Steve stays in the past in the year 1949, that at that point is actually the 828 universe of the Fantastic Four. Scoopers like Robert Meyer Burnett, who I think also saw the Doomsday footage and
So when he goes into the past, he's in the 828 universe. Why didn't he just go back to the main timeline where Peggy's at? Why he gotta be in a different timeline with a different Peggy?
Las Vegas tweeted last week, Steve's appearance in the Doomsday trailer is 11 years after the clip posted here, referring to the first teaser from December. He has yet to meet Doom in this original clip. In the Doomsday teaser, he has already met Doom because he'd been living on the Fantastic Four Earth with Peggy and Jim, his son. Now, I don't know where Robert got the number 11, but he is one of those folks claiming insider knowledge that I do not have and I cannot independently verify. But Avengers Endgame
That's
did
another
explain
good
the
point.
timeline logic, according to the Ancient One to Bruce Banner, as this. When major changes are made to the past, like removing an Infinity Stone, it causes a branch timeline to form and basically form a new separate universe. This is assuming that the MCU considers timelines, universes, and realities to all mean the same thing. That at least seems to be the case with the Sacred Timeline and its various branches in the Loki series, which I assume Doomsday will adopt if they are including Loki in the TVA in this story, and if they're going to build on Renslayer saying this in the Loki pilot.
We're not here to talk about the Avengers.
Oh no?
No. What they did was supposed to happen. You escaping was not.
And after Endgame, the Russo brothers said that when Steve stayed in the past, he then created a new alternate branch history that is not the same history of the MCU. Their interpretation is that Steve lived his life in a history in some other universe in the multiverse, and then at the end of whatever that life was, old Steve Rogers used some multiverse navigating technology to come back to Earth 616 at the end of Endgame to give Sam the shield and coyly not talk about what his life was like. But the screenwriters of Endgame, Marcus and McFeely, had a different interpretation that contradicted the Russos at the time. The screenwriters believed that Steve stayed in the past of the main MCU timeline, that there was only one universe, and that Steve lived in the background of the history of the MCU that we had been in. But I've always pointed out the logic issues with that, because it would logically mean that Steve Rogers allowed his best friend Bucky Barnes to get tortured for decades by Hydra, and allowed JFK to get assassinated, and allowed Tony Stark's parents to get murdered, and allowed 9/11 to happen. Everything bad that happened would be Steve's fault, because he would have known that those things were going to happen and did not stop them. But in 2025, the Russo brothers and returning writer Stephen McFeely mentioned some big idea in interviews that excited them about coming back to direct another Avengers movie. And I think that big idea had to do with that disagreement they had, with fixing and clarifying the logic of Steve Rogers' choice and showing how that choice led to the consequences of Dr. Doom in Doomsday. I think that consequence specifically is that Steve Rogers created the whole 828 universe of the Fantastic Four. The one universe, for now,
Nigga, wait, what? What? I ain't gonna lie, that might be a OD way of saying how the Fantastic Four ends up connecting to any of this shit. That is nuts. If that's true, that'd be fire.
that has Dr. Doom in it. Now again, I'm sorry if any of you were theorizing something along similar lines and trying to tell me this in the past and I was just too stubborn to listen. But this is how I now think it all connects. Imagine that the 828 universe is the branch timeline that Steve formed by staying in the past. That Nexus moment caused the creation of a branch history that would have had to fill in a hypothetical future and a hypothetical past ahead of and behind that new 1949. Presumably World War II had happened in the same way that it did in the 616 universe for there to be a Peggy Carter who still missed and loved Steve Rogers. But now that there was a Steve Rogers super soldier who did not get frozen in the ice, still serving American interests in the DC area, there wouldn't necessarily have been a Cold War and a Hydra conspiracy that played out the exact same way in that history. You can imagine that Steve Rogers would have made different choices throughout the 1950s. Like in 1949, right around the time the Soviets tested their first atomic bomb, Steve Rogers could have made extra choices to go to Robert Oppenheimer and Louis Strauss and the Atomic Energy Commission and say, no, we do not have to make the super. We don't have to make the hydrogen bomb. We don't have to have this arms race. We can just stop at these single-digit atomic weapons.
You know, I still haven't seen Oppenheimer,
this big
bro.
Idea was done in part by the fact that Robert Downey Jr. played Louis Strauss in a movie that the Russos and McFeely saw. And I think Steve Rogers could have gotten about a decade's worth of timeline altering. And by the time we get to 1961, the world could have looked entirely different. And we would not have had NASA, we would have had ANSA, like we saw in Fantastic Four First Steps. And that ANSA would have sent astronauts in 1961 named Reed Richards, Sue Storm, Johnny Storm, and Ben Grimm, who, due to cosmic radiation on a test flight, received powers and became the Fantastic Four of this 828 universe. In fact, maybe the reason last summer's Fantastic Four First Steps did not show us that cosmic radiation affecting them and only conveyed it through audio of a radio transmission is because those cosmic rays came from some incursion.
I mean, I ain't gonna lie, that's a good option. We could watch for real.
Earth. Thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. May is Mental Health Awareness.
Hey, Eric Voss, salute. Get your bag, gang.
So let's play out the timeline of this universe, the 828 universe, if this theory is correct. 1949, that's the year Steve stayed behind with Peggy. We actually got that date from the official in-game screenplay that established Peggy's house as being in Washington, D.C., 1949. And it actually looks like it was in the fall of 1949. Then in the mid-50s, Steve and Peggy's baby is born. Some time has passed in that first Doomsday teaser scene since the final scene in Endgame. We know it takes at least 9 months from conception to birth, and I'm telling you, that baby is at least a few months old. And the motorcycle Steve drives is a 1950 Triumph T100. It doesn't look that new, at least a year old. So I'm gonna put this Doomsday scene at 1954. Like, Steve and Peggy would have wanted some honeymoon time to get busy and do some dancing before actually starting a family. Now, we've been guessing that Steve and Peggy will name their son James or Jim or Jimmy after James Buchanan Barnes. 1961, the Fantastic Four arrive on the scene. Sue Storm creates the Future Foundation that unites the world in peace, suggesting no Cold War with Russia and probably no Hydra in this universe. 1965, the main events of Fantastic Four First Steps take place. Franklin Richards is born, Galactus shows up and gets teleported away. Now, I know I'm not the first person to theorize this, but the post-credit scene in Fantastic Four First Steps that shows the animated kids show inspired by these heroes' actual heroics is watched by some father and son whose face we do not see. Some have theorized
Oppenheimer is trash? Is it really? No way. They was glazing the fuck out of that movie when that motherfucker came out and all types of shit. No way that shit is that bad, bro. No, I was about to say, fuck out of here, bro. They was glazing the hell out that movie. A top 3 Nolan movie. Oh, shit. I forgot Christopher Nolan made that shit. That's crazy.
That this could be Steve Rogers and his son Jim watching that show in the 828 universe. And that boy...
What if Odyssey take one of them spots? Odyssey look fire, yo. That motherfucker look gas. I ain't even gonna lie to you. I can't wait to go see that shit.
It would be around 11 years old at this point. Bringing us to 1969 to 1970, this is when the mid-credit scene of Fantastic Four takes place, when Dr. Doom arrives and takes Franklin Richards. That would be the point at which the Fantastic Four connect with the other Marvel heroes in Avengers Doomsday. So if we know Steve stayed with Peggy in 1949, and we think that that baby is born in the mid-50s, it's actually closer to 15 or 16 years from the Doomsday scene with Steve's baby to Steve with Thor in the Doomsday trailer. But maybe my math is wrong, and it is something like 11 years. I don't know. But the big detail that's pointing in this direction for me is the fact that on Steve and Thor's ship in the trailer, Johnny Storm is in the background, and I actually think the other members of the Fantastic Four are there too. I think that's on their ship that we see in the Thunderbolts post-credit scene. And when Thor deboards the Fantastic Four ship earlier in the trailer to Avengers Tower, he is only carrying Stormbreaker. So I think that moment is after this moment with Steve. So even though we don't see it in the first 20 seconds of the trailer, when the Fantastic Four and Thor are walking off that ship, I think Steve Rogers is actually with them. And I think Steve Rogers is also in Avengers Tower with everyone else when Thor and Reed Richards are explaining what's going on. So it tells us that Steve must start this movie in the same universe where the Fantastic Four are. And the most logical explanation is that Steve starts this movie living in their world. And I think it's a world that his actions in Endgame spawned into existence. In Earth 828, Steve Rogers was going to be a retired World War II super soldier who did enough to stop hydrogen bombs from being invented in the early 50s, who then after that did not need to be a hero in the world, especially when the Fantastic Four arrived, so was ready to live a quiet life as a father. But then, bam, Dr. Doom shows up and takes his kid, a guy named Victor who looks a lot like his old friend Tony. So this freaks him out, so he goes to find the heroes of this world who know
that
multiverse, the Fantastic Four, and they're like, hey, our kid is missing too. And then Thor flies in through a rift in the sky and meets them in the Baxter building and says, holy shit, my daughter's missing too. When the Fantastic Four cast told Collider that a lot of familiar Avengers faces are going to be on that couch with them in the redesigned Baxter building lobby, not only were they referring to Thor, I think they were referring to Steve Rogers. So when Thor in this trailer says, that's not possible, he's not just reacting to seeing Steve.
Bro, stop bringing up Toby, please. I don't want to see this shit. I don't want to see that on the screen when I go and watch this fucking movie. If I see my childhood fucking Spider-Man hero get fucking blitzed in the first 15 minutes of the movie, I'm probably going to hate watch that whole movie. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to still be excited to watch it. That's going to piss me the fuck off. Because I know this movie's going to be like 3 hours. That shit's genuinely going to piss me the fuck off. I do not want to see this nigga get blitzed in the first 20 minutes of the movie, bro. I don't. I really don't. That's gonna aggravate me. It really is. And when I find out who does blitz it, I'm supreme hating watch. I'm hate watching until that motherfucker gets a blitz too. The fuck? Good lord, bro. I better not see Toby get packed in a fucking multi-million-dollar fucking Avengers, an Avengers level movie with 50 other heroes. I'm gonna be fucking pissed. I don't care, bro. I'm gonna be fucking pissed regardless, bro. I better not see this nigga get blitzed. Hey, bro, I'm telling you, Bailey, if any of that shit you said true and he does get blitzed, it's your ass. I promise. And I gotta wait a whole nother year to see what happens again. That's your ass, bro. I ain't gonna lie, you might get banned. I ain't gonna lie.
I think what he's really talking about was the most chilling consequence of what Steve did. In that alternate 828 universe that was created, it came from a villain that the multiverse had previously denied being allowed to have an existence, Victor Von Doom. And that Victor Von Doom of the 828 Latveria looks exactly like their old friend Tony Stark. In every other universe of the sacred timeline that he remains and Loki had tried to maintain, someone that smart and that talented was sorted into being someone named Tony Stark. But in this accidental
hell yeah, we gonna jump that nigga.
someone with that soul became Victor Von Doom.
And jump the fuck out of him.
With Stark's face is what scares Thor this much. It's what he considers to be impossible. So that's how I think Steve returns in Doomsday, and how the ending of Endgame could be reinterpreted to connect the dots to the Fantastic Four, Doctor Doom, and what's really happening in Doomsday. Does it make sense to you? Do you like this theory? Am I stupid and wrong? Comment down below with your thoughts, and a special thanks to one of our
I ain't gonna lie, Eric Voss W video, bro. That I ain't gonna lie, that would be a crazy theory. If this nigga Steve Rogers was the reason all this shit started in the fucking first place because he wanted to go have a life of pick, that would be nuts. Genuinely. W vid though.
Call me Mr. M-O-M-E-N-T. She prays she never miss a moment.